The shocking truth behind Volkswagen's dark history. Untold secrets revealed. In an unassuming town, a storm brewed beneath the glossy exterior of one of the world's largest car manufacturers. Secrets, dark and chilling, lay hidden in the shadows, secrets that could rattle the hearts of even the staunchest VW fans. Whispers of corruption danced through candlelit diners and corner bars, where patrons exchanged hushed tones over the latest actions of the automaker. To an outsider, it was just another ordinary day. But inside those corporate walls, something was brewing, an unsettling truth. On a rainy Tuesday evening, a former engineer stumbled into a dive bar, his eyes wide with terror. He clutched a worn envelope, its edges singed as if it had survived a fire. He spoke in quick breaths, his voice quaking. Underneath the facade of family values and eco-friendliness, he hinted at a scandal that would turn the world of automotive manufacturing upside down, a sinister plot that involved cheating emissions tests in favor of profits. The room held its breath. He wasn't just spitting rumors. This was a man who had been inside the labyrinth of deceit. The tension escalated when an old woman behind the counter whispered, "I knew they weren't what they claimed." Her voice trembled, echoing the fears of all who listened. Every pair of eyes focused on the engineer. What could possibly be so terrible that it drove him to share this story in such a vulnerable state? With every word he spoke, the heat in the room rose, matching the urgency in his tone. In that moment, the bartender cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "Listen, if you're gonna spill, now's the time." The electric buzz in the bar intensified, and the townsfolk leaned closer, craving every detail. Each person present knew the stakes. This wasn't just about cars, it was about trust, about values shattered. Hey! Before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon, and while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. With those words, silence fell again, thicker than before, as the engineer prepared to finally reveal the truth. It wasn't just software manipulation, it went deeper, much deeper. The room collectively gasped, hearts racing, minds whirling. What else had VW hidden? What did this mean for drivers everywhere? Before the full picture could emerge, unexpected sirens wailed outside, slicing through the tension like a blade, leaving everyone in shock. The bartender glanced at the engineer. The color drained from his face. The stakes had just shot through the roof. What revelations lurked just beyond the next revelation? What could possibly come next? The sirens wailed louder, drowning out the bartender's nervous breaths in a cascade of chaos. Shocked faces turned toward the windows, hearts pounding in rhythm with the blaring alarms outside. The rain pounded against the glass like hostile fists, mirroring the storm in the engineer's heart. He looked poised to bolt, desperation flooding his features. "What did you do?" a thick-set man yelled from the back, his brow furrowed in concern. The crowd edged closer, uncertain what the engineer had pulled them into. The engineer's hands trembled as he gripped the envelope tight, as if it held the weight of the world inside. "I swear, it wasn't supposed to happen this way," he gasped, eyes darting around, paranoia spilling into focus. "I just wanted to expose the truth." Suddenly, the door burst open, letting in a gust of cold air and an imposing figure in a dark uniform. The bar fell silent as everyone turned to stare. The officer's piercing gaze scanned the room, landing on the engineer, body tense as a coiled spring. "Get outside," the officer commanded, voice like gravel. "All of you, now." Gasps echoed, but the officer's firm demeanor left no room for disobedience. Once outside, the drizzle soaked everyone, adrenaline mixing with disbelief. The flashing lights of police cars illuminated the street, casting eerie shadows. People murmured questions, eager for answers. "What's going on?" A woman shouted, her voice shrill. "You!" the officer barked, pointing at the engineer. "What have you stirred up?" He stammered, but the officer cut him off, storming forward. "Are you aware of what you've put at risk?" The officer didn't wait for an answer, instead turning to the crowd. "Volkswagen has employed tactics to manipulate their vehicle's emissions reports, yes? It's bigger than you think." Gasps filled the air, a collective shock. People exchanged glances, disbelief weaving through them like a tight noose. The rain slicked the pavement, mirroring the somber realization that hit them. "This isn't just another car scandal," the officer continued, intensity growing. "We're investigating large-scale corporate wrongdoing. You're all here at the wrong time. This isn't just a headline. It's your lives we're talking about." Fear gripped the crowd like an iron fist. No one dared to move as the engineer stood frozen, grappling with the weight of everything. His revelation now tangled deeper with the looming threat of authority. Terror danced in the air, as a sensation of time froze, questions flashing through the minds of all present. How deep did this conspiracy run? What would happen next? Suddenly, the engineer broke the silence with a desperate shout. "You'll never believe what else I found out. It's not just emissions. They're hiding something more sinister." Before he could share more, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. A shadowy figure, cloaked in anonymity, slipped through the darkness, a slip of paper glowing white in their hand. The figure moved swiftly, weaving through the crowd before disappearing into the dim light of the alley. Panic surged. The barrier of doubt merged with immediate danger. The officer scoured the onlookers, his eyes narrowing. Did anyone see that person? But what had been revealed in the dark night? And what did it mean? Questions danced, spinning into a web of confusion and dread. The engineer turned toward the alley where the figure had vanished, his heart racing with fear and revelation as the tension thickened in the air. One thought pierced through. What had those shadows taken, and was it too late to bring back the light? The crowd surged like waves against the rocky shore, a mass of tense energy. Whispers bounced off the walls of the bar, mingling with the patter of rain. Eyes blinked in disbelief. The weight of words hung heavy in the air. The engineer, lost in a whirlwind of fear and urgency, stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Wait," he breathed, clutching the envelope tighter. "If only I could tell you." The officer raised a hand, silencing him. "You don't grasp the danger you've unleashed." His voice thundered, cutting through the chaos. "People are already in danger because of your reckless actions. We need to contain this before it spirals out of control." But the engineer was no longer listening. He stared into the darkness of the alleyway where the figure had disappeared. "There's something they want us to know. Something we can't ignore." People shivered, not from the cold rain but from the chill of uncertainty. The officer stepped closer, a tense frown etched across his face, scanning the alley as if expecting the shadowy figure to reappear. He exhaled sharply. "This is not just some conspiracy theory. The implications are far beyond what you comprehend." From the back of the crowd, someone shouted, "Then tell us, what is it?" Desperation mingled with anger. The air crackled as the mob demanded answers. The officer turned to face them fully, the authority in his stance now wavering. "We're being watched," he stated, glancing nervously around as headlights sliced through the night. "They've infiltrated not only Volkswagen but law enforcement too. I can't guarantee everyone has safety here, but if we stand together." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from across the street. A glass window shattered, sending shards scattering like lost hopes on the pavement. Gasps erupted from the crowd, eyes darting instinctively to the sound. Then, as if summoned by the noise, a group of figures emerged from the shadows, their intent unclear. "Run!" the officer barked, voice rising above the panic. People stumbled back as chaos erupted, feet pounding against the slick ground, each person pushed by an instinctual fear. The engineer stood frozen, watching the figures advance with a mix of dread and resolve. "Stay together," the officer yelled, grabbing the engineer's arm, pulling him toward the narrow space between two buildings. They ducked into the alley, where the shadows swallowed them whole. If you know anything more, speak now. We need a plan. The engineer's breath was ragged as he fumbled with the envelope. I have the evidence, that paper. It holds the truth about their corruption, how they manipulated emissions, yes, but there's something darker. What do you mean? The officer pressed, urgency carving out the lines of his face. They're involved in illegal testing with real lives at stake. It's a cover-up that goes beyond anything we thought. The words tumbled out like stones, heavy with dread. Before he could say more, a flicker of movement caught his eye. The shadowy figure reappeared, eyes glinting in the dim light. They held up the paper, waving it like a flag. Stop! Don't let them get it! The officer commanded, but it was too late. The figure vanished again, disappearing around the corner as a cool wind swept through the alley. The crowd lay scattered, and with paranoia bubbling to the surface, the engineer felt the world tilt beneath him. What was the truth behind that paper? What darkness did it hold that even the officer feared? As the rain poured harder, washing away the last remnants of their hope, the engineer knew one thing for certain: the race was on. But against whom? The answer lingered tantalizingly close, just out of reach. The rain fell heavier, drenching the alley in a curtain of despair. The engineer stood frozen, the weight of his knowledge pressing down as he struggled to grasp everything happening around him. Panic gnawed at the edges of his mind. If he failed to act quickly, he might lose not only his chance at the truth but his very life as well. Come on. The officer's grip tightened as he pulled the engineer deeper into the darkness. We can't let them cut us off. Just a few paces ahead, the chaos of the street erupted. Shouts, cries, the sounds of crashing metal filled the air. The engineer felt the adrenaline surge through him, fighting the encroaching dread. He had to understand what that figure had taken. Was it the evidence he'd worked so hard to gather? As the officer led him further into the alley, flashes of headlights illuminated the walls around them. Brief glimpses of shadowy figures darting about heightened the urgency. Where are you taking us? The engineer whispered, trying to regain his bearings. To a safe spot, the officer replied, his eyes scanning the shadows. We need to regroup. I need to know what's on that paper. The engineer fumbled with the remnants of his envelope, desperate to retain some grip on the words that could change everything. They have a list. Names. Who they've silenced, who they think might expose them. It connects the dots before he could finish. A sudden surge of footsteps echoed behind them. The officer cursed under his breath. We're not alone. Stay close. He pushed the engineer ahead, darting into a narrow door leading to an empty warehouse. Inside, the air was thick with a musty odor. Darkness swallowed them whole, the faint light filtering through dirty windows casting eerie shadows. The engineer's pulse quickened, his heart racing as he leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. What do we do now? He asked, voice tense. We figure out what we're up against, the officer replied. His tone is edged with determination. We can't let them take that paper. It's our only shot. A storm of emotions churned in the engineer. Fear clashed with a fierce resolve. It has to get out. People deserve to know. We can't just sit here. Neither of us can afford to be reckless. The officer's voice dropped to a whisper. We're caught in something way bigger than us. If they find out we're onto them, a loud thud resonated from the entrance, slamming against the door, interrupting their conversation. The officer pulled the engineer close to the wall again, as the rumble of a low voice spilled through the cracks. Search everywhere. They can't be far. The men sounded ruthless, no hint of mercy in their tone. Tension filled the room, like the air before a storm. The engineer swallowed hard, heart hammering in his chest. They're hunting for us. What if they find out about the paper? There's no what if about it. They need to be stopped. The officer clenched his fists, eyes flickering with urgency and fear. What did the paper say about them? We need to know everything now. I need a moment. As the engineer struggled to collect his thoughts, the sound of footsteps drew closer. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. Suddenly, the officer's voice cut through the tension. We can't stay. They'll find us. We need another exit. But the engineer hesitated, a thought sparking in his mind. What if we set a trap? If they're after us, they'll come looking for me. We can use that to our advantage. For a brief moment, the officer stared, weighing the options. A dangerous gamble, but what choice did they have? You're sure? The looming threat of discovery heightened the stakes. We need to make them believe we're still here. As the footsteps echoed dangerously close, the engineer's heart raced at the idea of leading the predators directly into their own trap. Was this madness or genius? Could the darkness they were tangled in be turned against them? The door rattled violently, and the men outside shouted again, growing impatient. But lurking in the depths of uncertainty, they both knew one thing. Time was running out, and the game was about to escalate in unexpected ways. The engineer had never felt so alive and yet so close to death all at once. His mind whirled with images of shadowy figures, the echoes of chaos making him feel like a moth drawn to a flame. He blinked, clutching the paper tighter, aware that his life might depend on its contents. Okay, he breathed, battling the clenching fear in his chest. Let us do this. The officer nodded, face pale but determined. He glanced around the dim confines of the warehouse, searching for anything that might aid their daring ploy. We'll need to create noise, something to draw them in. Can you find anything? The engineer nodded, adrenaline fueling his search. His eyes darted across the cramped space, and he spotted an old metal barrel. He grinned, the idea sparking like a match in the dark. That should do it. If I kick it hard enough, it'll make a hell of a racket. Good plan, the officer said, casting a wary look toward the door. I'll cover you. As soon as you kick it, I want you to run and hide behind the stack of boxes. Got it. Just be ready. Okay? The engineer swallowed, his chest tightening with a deep breath. He crouched by the barrel. He kicked it with everything he had. The metal screeched against the ground, crashing into the wall with a thunderous clang. The sound reverberated in the cramped space, echoing loudly in the air like a loud siren. Over there, a voice shouted from the entrance, sharp and commanding. Panic swept through the engineer as he darted behind the stack of boxes. Heart racing. He held his breath, heart pounding, as heavy footsteps echoed, moving toward the sound of the barrel. The officer pressed against the wall, tense, his eyes locked on the doorway. For a fleeting second, hope flickered like a distant star. Their plan might just work. Search here. They couldn't have gone far. The men's voices grew louder, anticipation thick in the air. The engineer glanced at the officer, who nodded subtly. The officer pulled out his firearm, whispering something just over the tremors of chaos. On my mark, wait until they're close. Every second stretched into an eternity. The engineer edged forward, peering through the boxes. He could see shadows moving, indistinct and sprawling. They had to be just beyond reach. He could sense it. Careful, they're coming, the officer cautioned through gritted teeth. This was it. The moment that would define everything. The engineer's stomach churned with dread and hope. Would they turn the tide, or was this madness destined to backfire? When the men finally stepped into the dim light, faces hidden beneath masks of arrogance, the officer's voice rang clear. Now, with one swift movement, the officer emerged from behind the boxes. Caught off guard, the intruders spun around, eyes wide with shock. But it didn't matter how quickly they reacted. The officer squeezed the trigger, and bullets flew, ringing like a death knell. Chaos erupted once more, screams blending with gunfire, and the engineer felt breathless. Amid the turmoil, the paper slipped from his fingers. It fluttered to the ground like a fallen bird, landing just out of reach. He lunged for it, desperation fueling his actions. Don't! The officer shouted, but the command was drowned in chaos. The engineer managed to snag the edge of the paper just as the chaos in front of him intensified. And then it happened. A sudden explosion of light and sound erupted at the entrance. Shattered glass rained down, a blinding barrage of chaos that threw everything into further disarray. What the hell was that? The engineer gasped, gripping the paper tightly. Run! The officer shouted, but the engineer hesitated, torn. Was the document truly worth it? They had come so far, with lives hanging in the balance. But the revelation sealed within its folds could be the catalyst for change, could be the salvation of countless souls. Come on. The officer's voice shattered through the haze of uncertainty. We can't stay here. With a nod, the engineer joined the officer, fleeing deeper into the maze of the warehouse. Shadows flickered behind them. Those hunting them were relentless. The echo of their footsteps filled the air as they dashed around corners, uncertainty looming with every passing breath. The trap they had set was no longer effective. They were the hunted now, time slipping away like sand through their fingers. Would they evade the looming danger? Or would the darkness finally catch up to them, consuming everything they stood to fight for? Only one truth shone through the chaos. They were running out of time. The echoes of gunfire faded as the engineer and the officer sprinted through the maze of cardboard boxes and old machinery. The air was thick with the scent of rust and sweat, a nasty mix that hinted at decay and desperation. Each sharp turn they took sent their hearts racing, the adrenaline surging like fire in their veins. Where now? The engineer panted, struggling to catch his breath, eyes wide with fear. There was a flicker of movement in the corner of his vision, shadows twisting like dancers in the gloom. We need to find a way out, the officer replied, eyes darting toward the flickering light filtering through a broken window. This way. They veered toward the light, a beacon against the surrounding darkness. But as they approached, the engineer's gut tightened. They could almost feel the weight of their pursuers tugging at their backs. The hunt just beginning. Heavy footsteps echoed from behind them. The words of the officer rang in his ears. Just keep moving. They stumbled around a rusted forklift, barely dodging the bright beam of a flashlight that swept across the room. Shadows rolled and then dissolved as the beam passed. The engineer's mind raced, each beat of his heart yelling for him to think fast. Do you think they know about the paper? He asked, breathless with urgency. I don't know, but it's not worth the risk to find out, the officer replied. He shifted around a stack of crates, pulling the engineer close. If they catch us, it's over. We stick to the dark and we move. But the paper, it burned in the engineer's pocket, a reminder of what was at stake. It whispered secrets that could shake the very foundations they were fighting against. He had to keep it safe. The officer paused, his expression shifting from panic to determination. He pulled the engineer closer. We need to make a distraction. Something big enough to cover our escape. What do you have in mind? The engineer felt a pulse of hope through the thick dread. Over there. That old generator. The officer pointed to a hulking piece of machinery in the corner, its body dented and laced with rust. We'll divert them by creating a loud explosion. Get to the control panel and rip the wires out. Can you do that? The engineer nodded, already calculating the risks like an engineer should. Good. While you do that, I'll draw their attention away, the officer said. Ready? He barely had time to respond before the officer took off, running back toward the shadows, yelling for all he was worth. The engineer watched, fear prickling his skin as the officer's shouts echoed menacingly against the walls. Now alone, the engineer dashed toward the generator, his heart pounding against his ribs. He could hear footsteps thundering in his direction, voices growing louder, agitated. He didn't have time to waste. He crouched by the generator and pried open the access panel. A jumble of wires and metal greeted him, a complete mess. He could feel the sweat trickling down his back as he quickly assessed the wires. Red for power, blue for the ground. All it took was the right cut, and a loud crash from behind startled him. The officer had engaged them. The noise thundering in the distance made the hair on the back of the engineer's neck stand up. Come on, come on, the engineer begged himself, ripping at the wires with unsteady hands. Time felt slippery, like the smoke from the blast that he needed to create. It took one swift slice through the thick wire, and everything changed. The generator roared to life with a deafening hiss. The engineer stumbled back, shielding his eyes just as sparks erupted, sending shocks of panic echoing around him. He turned just in time to see shadows piling into the doorway, the intruders realizing the ruse. Now, he yelled, shoving away from the generator. Go, go. The officer's voice cut through the chaos, urging him to flee deeper into the darkness. But as the engineer dove for safety, the harsh lights of flashlights swept closer, illuminating every frightened corner. The shouts of confusion mixed with the cracking of electric wires buzzing out of control. Each heartbeat felt like it might be his last. Would they make it out? Or had they set off something that would cost them dearly? As they regrouped, shadows danced behind them, and a sickening sense of dread settled in the engineer's stomach. They were not alone, and time was running out faster than they could think. Shouts echoed like thunder, drowning out everything else. The officer darted ahead, weaving through the debris, urgency written all over his face. The engineer sprinted after him, the heel of his boot catching a stray piece of metal and sending him sprawling. He hit the ground hard, the impact jarring as the air whooshed from his lungs. Pain shot up his ribcage, but there was no time to dwell on it. "Come on," the officer yelled, glancing back. "Get up, they're right behind us." With a desperate gasp, the engineer pushed himself up, ignoring the biting pain in his side. He spotted the officer leaping over a stack of crates, then disappearing around a corner ahead. The engineer scrambled to his feet and raced forward, fists clenched, his heart pounding like a war drum. In the chaos, he felt for the paper, checking it was still tucked safely inside his pocket where it could not be lost. It was more than just a piece of paper. It contained the blueprints that could expose the corruption running rampant in their organization. If it fell into the wrong hands, the officer's shadow slipped around a barricade, and the engineer followed blindly, adrenaline stripping away any trace of fear. They were nearing a faulty exit sign flickering like a dying star. The promise of escape was tantalizing, but a cold sweat gripped him as he heard a loud echo that shivered through the air. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps pounding hard into the ground. "We're almost there," the officer urged. "Just a bit further." Suddenly, a bright beam of light swept through the maze of crates. The engineer's heart raced. They would be caught if they lingered any longer. He dove into the narrow space beside the wall, letting the shadows engulf him. This wasn't the same fear he felt moments ago. It was a deep, gnawing instinct for survival that drove him now. "Where are you?" The voice of the officer cracked like a whip, sounding distant. "I'm here," the engineer whispered, his voice barely a thread. He waited, straining to hear if the officer had made it further through the chaos. Then another gunshot rang out. The sound was deafening and sent a fresh wave of panic shooting through him. Was that the officer? He pressed against the cold wall, breath hitching in his throat as he listened. Footsteps were getting closer, too close. A voice he didn't recognize shouted orders, commanding the others. "Fan out." They couldn't have gotten far. The engineer felt the heat rising to his cheeks, his claustrophobic hideaway becoming a cage. He needed to move or they would find him. He edged forward, every muscle tight with tension, and just as he crested the corner, he caught a glimpse of the officer fighting two figures, one of them striking hard against the officer. "No," he breathed, terror coursing through his veins. A choice loomed before him. He could rescue the officer, sure to put them both in greater danger, or flee and save what little escape was left. But the thought of leaving the officer behind was unbearable that he dashed into the open, fists at the ready as if he could change the tide of chaos with sheer will. The officer had numbers against him, but he still fought like a wild animal, defending himself with everything he had. "Get down," the engineer shouted, and out of instinct, the officer ducked just as the engineer lunged for one of the intruders. The two figures turned, confusion flashing in their eyes for a split second. The engineer swung hard, crashing into one, sending them sprawling back against the wall. But their ally lunged toward him, a blade glinting ominously in the harsh light. "Look out," the officer shouted, desperation ringing through his voice in a heartbeat. The engineer felt the sting of cool steel slice through air where he'd been just moments before. Every instinct screamed for him to escape, but as he hurled himself sideways, he locked eyes with the officer. They needed a plan, but all he'd gotten was an agonizing heartbeat, promising that time was slipping through their fingers. Would they both escape, or would the shadows finally claim? Them? Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from another room deeper within the building, reverberating against the walls. An explosion. No, it wasn't that. It was the sound of machinery falling apart, like the world was coming down around them. What was that? The engineer yelled just as the intruders turned. Now distracted. Now is our chance. The officer fired back, eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. They sprinted forward, the chaos behind them fading into uncertain silence. But as they turned down a corridor leading to the exit, an unexpected figure loomed at the end, shrouded in darkness. Stop right there. It all came crashing down. Who was that? What did they want? And were they really about to find out the truth behind the sinister game they had unwittingly become a part of? The figure at the end of the corridor stepped into the flickering light, revealing a face the engineer thought he'd never see again. Sophia, his former partner. Her expression was a mix of disbelief and anger, like a thunderstorm trapped in a single moment. What are you doing here? The officer yelled, urgency lacing his voice. Moving out of the shadows. She shot back, pulling a weapon from her belt. But you're in way over your heads. The engineer's heart dropped. Was she here to help or hinder? The corridor felt narrower, heat rising in his chest. He didn't have time to process the treachery as he saw the flash of steel cutting through that tension. Get down, he shouted, instinctive fear pushing his body into motion as the officer dropped low. A sharp crack rang out, ricocheting off the concrete walls. But it wasn't from Sophia's gun, it was the sound of their pursuers, alerted and storming toward them. Sophia cursed under her breath. You're outmatched. You need to get out now. No, we can fight, the engineer began. But the officer interrupted, pulling him closer, urgency on his face. Let us not waste time. What do you know? Sophia exhaled sharply, her grip tightening on the weapon. If I get you out, there's no turning back. You'll know everything. The officer's eyes darted toward the shadows behind them, the sound of heavy footsteps nearing. Decisions danced in the air like sparks from a fire. Were they really ready to dive into the depths of this chaos? They had to move. Fine, he grunted, adrenaline saturating his voice. Lead the way. But before Sophia could take a step, the corridor exploded into chaos. Figures emerged from the shadows, swarming toward them like a pack of hungry wolves. The trio split instinctively, Sophia veering right, the officer sprinting left, and the engineer hesitating as fear paralyzed him. Run! The officer shouted, and the command jolted him back into reality. The engineer took off, instinctively clutching the blueprints in his pocket, his heart pounding. Adrenaline surged through his veins, electrifying every nerve as he sprinted past barricades and debris, dodging incoming shadows that leapt at him through the dim light. He could hear the clash of metal and the grunts of struggle behind him, echoing like a distant storm. Behind the chaos, he thought of Sophia's words. What did she know? Did she hold the key to unraveling the darkness that loomed over them? Suddenly, a bellowed voice cut through the mayhem, magnifying the terror thrumming within him. Don't let them escape. The engineer lunged down an unmarked passage, his feet pounding against the floor. The air turned thick, panic swelling behind him. He could feel the eyes of both the officer and Sophia on him. Couldn't they sense his desperate determination to discover the truth? In his flight, he crashed through a door, daylight spilling like a waterfall before him. He rushed outside, the sudden warmth washing over him. He looked over his shoulder, seeing shadows spill out behind him. But where were his allies? Where are you? He shouted, bleary-eyed, panic clawing at his throat. Amid the haze of chaos, he realized he was alone. The explosion echoed back inside the building, sending a tremor through the ground underfoot. The engineer's heart raced. Survival surged through him. He couldn't be caught out here. Not now. The ground shook again, and he stumbled, glancing over his shoulder just as the first figure emerged from the doorway. It wasn't the officer. With his breath hitching, he turned and ran. But this time, he didn't have to decide what to do next. He was bound for the unknown, hurtling toward a destiny he couldn't yet see. Desperation gripped him tighter. He thought of the blueprints, the secrets etched on that paper could change everything. But at what cost? As he ran, shadows chased him into the sunlight, and another figure stepped into his path, blocking his route. Where do you think you're going? The engineer's heart pounded like a war drum. Was he about to confront yet another enemy? Or could it be the truth waiting to be uncovered? But didn't he have time to think? All he knew was he couldn't stop now. Not when everything was on the line. The figure looming in front of him was tall, shrouded in shadows. The engineer's instincts screamed at him to flee, but the words hung in the air like undercurrents beneath the surface. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely rising above a whisper. The man stepped closer, the sun catching a glint off his black sunglasses. "You don't need to know my name. What you need is to listen." The stranger's voice had a cold, calculated edge to it, sending shivers down the engineer's spine. "Look, I don't have time for games." He cast a desperate glance back toward the building. The sounds of the chaos still pulsed from within, the clamber of footsteps echoing. If Sophia and the officer didn't break free soon, he would be facing whatever awaited him all alone. "Time is the one thing you haven't got, kid." The stranger leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They're coming for you. They want those blueprints more than you could ever understand." His words sliced through the veil of urgency hanging above him. The blueprints. He hadn't given them much thought amidst the pandemonium, but they were the key, weren't they? "What do you know about them?" With a flick of his wrist, the stranger threw a flash drive onto the ground between them. "Everything you need to know is on this. But you've got to make a choice. The moment you pick that up, there's no turning back." The engineer hesitated, the weight of the choice pressing against him. A chill crept down his spine as he considered the potential consequences. But the sounds behind him drew closer, drowning out his doubts. He couldn't go back now. In one swift move, he lunged for the flash drive, gripping it tightly in his hand. "Now tell me what this is all about." A flicker of a smile crossed the stranger's lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll find out soon enough. But remember, the truth carries a price." With that, the stranger melted back into the shadows, leaving the engineer with only the accelerating heartbeat in his ears and a surge of questions swirling in his mind. He shoved the drive into his pocket and turned, ready to bolt once more. But the moment he turned, he froze. Standing just outside the doorway was a group of figures, silhouetted against the light, blocking any escape. Behind them, flashes of movement darted in and out, an army of chaos ready to spring. "You're trapped," one of them taunted, raising an arm in a mock salute. "You should have stayed in the shadows." The engineer clenched his fists, adrenaline coursing through him. He felt cornered, like a deer caught in headlights. But the flash drive weighed heavy in his pocket, a promise of secrets waiting to be unearthed. Would those secrets save him or lead to betrayal? As the group advanced, a sense of clarity washed over him. He needed to act. He recalled the fight within himself when Sophia had reappeared. Whatever had driven her, whatever dark truth she had been chasing, he now had a piece of that puzzle. "Wait," he shouted, invoking every ounce of bravado he could muster. "What if I told you I know something? What if I could help you?" They paused, skepticism cutting through the haze. Was it a chance to escape, or was he just blurring the lines further? "Help?" The commanding figure scoffed. "Why would we trust you?" "Because I have the blueprints," he replied, voice steady but racing inside. "And I can show you things you've never seen before." Silence enveloped them. The group's posture shifted slightly, hesitation a crack in the facade they had presented. "What do you mean?" one of them demanded, eyeing the pocket where the engineer had tucked the flash drive. The engineer squared his shoulders, ready to take the plunge. "You really want to know? Then let us talk. But it has to be under my terms." Their eyes flickered with interest, the tension thick as he held his ground. A glimmer of hope sparkling amidst the storm. Could he turn the tide in his favor? Or was this yet another trap? He had no choice but to find out that as they stepped closer, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. Life and death danced on a razor's edge. Would revealing the truth lead to freedom or a chain of betrayal that would plunge him deeper into darkness? The unsettling silence wrapped around them, waiting for the storm to break. The rain had finally let up, leaving the air heavy with tension. The engineer stood facing the figures blocking his path, a mix of fear and determination bubbling inside him. He could feel the flash drive like a hot coal in his pocket, and he knew he had to convince these people that he could be of use. "What are you waiting for?" he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "If you want the truth, I can give it to you, but you have to let me live long enough to share it." A murmur went through the group. They exchanged glances, suspicion etched on their faces. The leader stepped forward, a tall silhouette with an air of authority. "And why should we trust you? You've got nothing but breadcrumbs compared to what we need." He took a deep breath. "Because I know what Volkswagen is hiding. It goes deeper than just emissions. They've been covering up lives lost in their quest for profit. If you have the blueprints, you can take them down. This isn't just a chance for you. It's a chance for everyone who has been hurt." A shift of disbelief passed through the group, but curiosity was also present. He could see it flicker in their eyes, and he seized the moment. "Let me show you. I have information on the people involved, names, dates, all of it," he implored. "What's your plan?" one of them asked, still wary but visibly intrigued. The engineer took another step forward, heartbeat racing. "We set a meeting. I'll provide you with everything I have. You'll see the extent of the corruption. But it has to be now before they find us." The leader glanced back at his group, deliberating. It felt like an eternity, the air thickening with dread. Every passing second could mean the difference between a way out or being consumed by the shadows. Finally, he nodded sharply. "All right, we'll listen. But no tricks. You cross us and you're done." Relief surged through the engineer, but he knew they weren't out of danger. "Let us go somewhere safe. I know a place." He turned, adrenaline rekindled as they made their way through the back alleys, staying hidden from watchful eyes. An old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town was their destination. Its walls were thick with years of secrets, much like the engineer himself. They slipped inside, the shadows swallowing them as they huddled together. Once inside, the engineer wasted no time. He pulled the flash drive from his pocket, heart thrumming, and connected it to a battered laptop they found nestled in the corner. The screen flickered to life, illuminating faces tense with curiosity. "Here are the names of everyone involved," he said, tapping at the keyboard. "This is where all their records of the emissions manipulations are stored, as well as a trail leading directly to those who got silenced." He could hardly breathe, the weight of the moment stifling. Whitish beams of light danced across the room as files popped onto the screen. The youthful faces of victims filled the display alongside their unfortunate stories, the darkness spilling out before them like ink. Gasps echoed around him as they began to absorb the information. Each name told a story, each file a battle lost against a titan of corporate greed. The engineer felt a shiver racing down his spine. "I didn't just run from the chaos." He lifted his chin, looking around at the faces, now mixed with anger and compassion. "I came here with hope. The truth will set us free, but only if we act on it." The leader nodded slowly, dark determination settling into his gaze. "We'll use this. We'll turn this around on them." As they prepared to rally resources, a sudden crash echoed outside the warehouse. All heads turned instinctively toward the sound, adrenaline flooding their veins once more. "Get ready. They're onto us," the leader commanded, voice strained with urgency. "We need to scatter and regroup. We can't let them take us out now." He felt the engineer's heart race again, sharper than before. The fight was far from over, but they now had a weapon: the truth. Together, they emerged from the shadows, ready to face whatever storm lay ahead. One thing became crystal clear: he had crossed a line, but he wouldn't back down. He was no longer just an engineer. He was a harbinger of change, burning with an insatiable fire for justice. They would not go quietly, and as they scattered into the night, the engineer took one last look at the warehouse, a fortress of their newfound resolve. The journey was just beginning, and whatever came next would forge their destiny together. Now was the time to act. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm. You need to flood the comments section with your reactions and theories. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Your support is crucial. Let us make this movement unstoppable.